for this show, which is very exciting. I always love having site-specific installations. Can you tell us a little bit about your work generally and also the install?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm recently went back to art making in 2022. I had a breakdown, mental crisis after the pandemic, and I was wondering what was my calling, and so that's how I decided to go to art making after decade plus of not making art. But I'm an installation artist, and I use everyday materials and give them protagonism. So like these are zip ties, and the way I came about thinking them as a material was me working with other materials and attaching things with zip ties. And so then I started looking at them as a material and how that connection, how they connected things, and how I could connect them with each other. So these are purely about materiality and how they connect to each other, and if I just keep adding to them, how they could come out of the wall, I feel like. But also they're like primal, and they're identity oriented, and there are many, and they have their uniqueness because they belong to the same family, but they're all very different. And I made sure that they all sort of look different and have personalities, and they were big, large, but they were part of the same family. I did like how Rachel wanted these pieces to be like folding, having two faces, and because I started thinking about the way I came about this idea was playing with the actual material and how I started connecting them, and how these glyph-like language was being created. And so I started thinking about it as a language that we might have forgotten, a language that we found. So it's like a glyph form, like Egyptian or an archaic language, but also a modern language that we might not know how to read yet, because we're so archaic in a way. So this is futuristic, but also primal in the sense of archaeology and historically also talking about art history, right? How drawing came first, and it was a very human nature of drawing on a wall. So I wanted it on a wall, but also because of the nature of the material being very linear and talks about drawing very much so.
Yeah. Thank you.
Ellen. Yeah.
One more question. Let's open up right away for questions. I feel like I see them.
I wanted to say I really love how it kind of reminds me both of you were saying a line drawing, but also kind of mitosis a little bit, cells splitting and just kind of growing in a way. Yeah, I think it's really beautiful.
Yeah, so this series, I started thinking of a series because I started creating these pieces, and it was kind of addictive, I have many more of these. And so, it's just the gusto of attaching them and hearing them click, because they click. And now I have, and then the residency, I had them sitting in my studio thinking, because I had other ideas of presentation. So then I showed them at the residency, and I got a great critique of you should just show them. So then I started showing them, and this is the second time I showed them, and they looked the installation looks different in a way. The previous installation looked like paper wall, it was very conspicuous of what the material was, and how it appears to be, but not, because it's white on white. And then there's a third iteration of this, and But yeah, the residency gave me that like push of like, since 2022, this species are called FOXP2 series, and that's a gene that's very, that is necessary for human speech and language. And so it's evolving just like language is. And I might not understand it yet. I'm sort of like trying to understand it on my own as an artist. And I have other ideas for the installation to be two-dimensional, like coming out of the wall, using different types of zip ties. I have metal zip ties, and I have 60-inch zip ties that are black. And I recently looked at some that are neon orange. So there is a lot of ideas that like came about just a very specific and mundane material.
I think something that I also am always intrigued by, and I think you actually do this with a lot of different materials that you make installations with, is there is this like concealment of what the actual material is. You know, it's kind of like there's, which I think is interesting. I'm curious if that's something cognizant for you, or if it's something intuitively just developing. Like even your installations, like what's the one that's in the show, the online show, the green.
Oh, the hula hoops.
The hula hoops, yeah. Like
green hula hoops,
you take all these different kind of like ordinary daily objects, and you very much like you change them, like in a visual way. Like they become very like also very referenced by modern art. Like you kind of like it's like a little art de pauvre, because you're using like the people's materials, but then you kind of they're like in this language of modernism, which I think is interesting. But do you ever are you intentionally trying to conceal their like materiality, or like what they are, or their function, or is that something you're thinking about, or not really?
When I started, not necessarily, but as time went by, and I started to develop kind of a recipe of like, because my work is about like number and repetition and like what pattern means and why we're attracted to pattern, and because it's like bliss, and because we live in a way that is very pattern oriented. We wake up in the morning and we have breakfast, and then we go to work and we go to the gym, or like whatever we do, or like have a so that's like a pattern, and that's also very language oriented, where the way we learn English or any sort of language is by repetition. And so repetition is like really important in the way that I work, because I feel that I'm attracted to it, and I feel like human nature is also attracted to it. And creating all these patterns, it's kind of like a recipe. But I also like the fact that it's not like disguising the material, it's still like bringing attention, but the fact that you have to look at it closely and demanding from the viewer to look at me, I'm important. I'm protagonizing this like art piece. I think that's important.
Cool.
I think there's so many layers to this. Like there's the visual exploration of pattern similarity, then there's language, there's the science background of the genes, and then there's also elevated everyday materials. So in your process, what comes first? Like do you pick a material and then it forms on the meaning, or do you think of a concept and then refine the material? Like it's just so many angles.
Great question. So I work. I'm Guatemalan, but I live here. So it's in my statement, my artist statement. I work with transcultural displacement, and the idea of finding yourself in a different environment and having to adapt to it. And so all the materials that I use sort of have to do that. Sometimes I add to materials that have nothing to do with each other, and they have to coexist with each other in a new environment and create a new environment. And at some point, they do belong to each other. But to your question, I work with a memory first, and usually a material that evokes a memory, a childhood memory. So it's very primal, and the materials that I use are very important to me because I have some sort of connection this material, for instance, is important to me because it was very functional as an artist. It had an identity that I was attracted to, and they sort of said like, you know, I'm not just an attachment mechanism. I have an identity of my own, and you can do that.